What exactly is geography? The study of the earth? Yes, but it's much more than that, too. Geography also includes the study of everything living on the earth, especially people. Because it is such a vast topic, the study of geography is usually divided into two parts: physical geography and human or cultural geography. Physical geography is the study of the Earth's surface, the different landforms and bodies of water that cover the Earth. Physical geography also includes the study of weather and climate, as well as the Earth's natural resources, such as plant life and minerals. Human geography is the study of people and how they interact with the Earth. It looks at how various cultures living in different regions of the world use Earth and its resources, and what effect this has on the Earth itself. The following program will examine both the physical aspect of geography and its human aspect, how we people living on Earth are affected by our physical surroundings, and in turn, what impact our presence has on this planet we call home. Over time, we have developed tools to help us better understand the Earth. For thousands of years, people looked at the world and tried to record what they saw. Motivated by the desire to find shorter trade routes, as much as by the desire for knowledge, early explorers traveled the world and drew maps of the places they had been. The maps they drew ranged from early whimsical attempts to later ones that were surprisingly accurate. The exploration of our world continues to this day, but explorers have the advantage of being able to study the Earth from space. Photographs taken from orbiting satellites have given us a more exact picture and a better understanding of the Earth. The primary tools that geographers and explorers have developed to study the Earth are maps and globes. A globe is a model or small copy of the Earth. Looking at a globe is like looking at the satellite pictures taken from space. Because a globe is round like the Earth, relative shapes, sizes, and distances are shown quite accurately. Globes, however, have their disadvantages. They're hard to carry around, and they can only show you one side of the Earth at a time. Maps are flat drawings of the Earth. Unlike globes, they can let you see the whole Earth at once. Or they can show you just a small part of the Earth, such as your town, in great detail. However, because the Earth is round and maps are flat, they do not show relative shapes, sizes, and distances as accurately as globes do. Geographers have found ways to solve the problem of drawing a round world on flat paper. They call these drawings projection maps. There are a number of different types of projection maps, and each has its particular advantages and uses. Mercator projection provides an accurate picture of shape and direction and is often used for ship navigation. The Robinson projection shows relative sizes more accurately, so is useful when making comparisons between places on the Earth. When discussing the Earth, geographers often divide it into two hemispheres. The word hemisphere means half a sphere, or half of the Earth. One division is made along an imaginary line halfway between the North and South poles. This line is called the equator. The equator divides the Earth into the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. Another imaginary line divides the Earth into the Eastern and Western Hemispheres. This line is called the prime meridian. In order to identify locations on a map or globe, geographers have created a system of imaginary lines called lines of latitude and lines of longitude. Latitude lines run east and west, longitude lines run north and south. These lines are measured in degrees. Degrees are further broken down to minutes and seconds. The equator is the starting point for measuring lines of latitude. The equator is 0 degrees latitude. Latitude lines are measured by the number of degrees they lie north or south of the equator. The prime meridian is 0 degrees longitude. Lines of longitude, then, are measured in the number of degrees they are east or west of the prime meridian. Together, these lines create a grid, or series of crisscrossed lines, to help you locate a point on a map or globe. When describing a location, we often speak of it in terms of direction. You already know north, south, east, and west. These 4 directions are called the cardinal directions. In between, there are 4 intermediate directions. Northwest, one intermediate direction, is halfway between north and west. The other 3 intermediate directions are northeast, southeast, and southwest. When using maps and globes, it helps to know what their scale is. The scale tells you their size in relation to the Earth. For instance, if the scale of a globe is 1 to 42 million, it means the Earth is 42 million times larger than the globe. You may often need to use a scale on a map in order to determine distances. A map scale may tell you, for example, that 1 inch on the map is equal to 100 miles on the Earth. The map scale is usually found in the map legend or map key. The map key contains other important information such as symbols. The map key tells you what different symbols represent, such as that a star is the symbol for a country's capital city. People use maps for many purposes, so there are many kinds of maps containing various information. One familiar map is a political map. It shows countries and cities. Another type of map is a physical relief map. It shows the natural features of the Earth, such as mountains, deserts, and lakes. Yet another type of map is a distribution map. This sort of map contains information such as population distribution or the amount of rainfall in different regions of the world. If you looked at the Earth from space, you would see that much of the Earth's surface is covered with water. In fact, water makes up 70% of the Earth's surface. Most of the water on the Earth is salt water, found in the world's ocean system. Even though the world's oceans are really all connected, they are generally considered to be 4 distinct oceans: the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, and the Arctic. The Earth's surface at the bottom of the ocean, called the ocean floor, contains valleys and mountains just like the rest of the Earth's surface. Some of these mountains rise above the surface of the oceans to form islands. Until recently, the Earth's ocean floor was not even as well mapped as the surface of Mars because geographers were unable to see it. But recent satellite technology has allowed them to map the ocean floor in much greater detail, revealing plains, ridges, and even volcanoes. Compared to the amount of salt water on the Earth, there is very little fresh water. In fact, only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh. Fresh water is found in lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. Fresh water can also be found underground. People can access this water, called groundwater, by digging wells. There is a finite amount of water on the Earth. That means no new water can be created. The water that exists today is the same water that existed thousands of years ago. Water just keeps going through a continuous cycle of movement called the water cycle. All water, from puddles to oceans, experiences a process called evaporation. The warmth from the sun changes the water into water vapor, and it rises into the air. Once in the air, the water vapor cools and condenses, changes back into water droplets, forming clouds. Eventually, the water falls back to Earth as rain, snow, or another form of precipitation, only to begin the water cycle all over again. the Earth's fresh water, the source of drinking water for all the people of the world, and provides the water needed for all the animals and plants on the Earth to live and grow. Because water is essential for survival, and because new water cannot be created, people have historically settled near sources of water. For example, some of the great early civilizations grew up along the Nile River Valley in Egypt, as the Nile provided plenty of water to drink and made the surrounding land fertile for growing crops. People settled near water for other reasons too. Great port cities were established near natural harbors and rivers because of the ease of transporting goods by water. Water also provided the energy needed for mills to grind grain into flour, resulting in the establishment of mill towns along rivers. The amount of water in a region of the world has a tremendous impact on the lifestyle of the people living there. Water affects what they eat, what kind of jobs they hold, as well as how they travel. People living in Japan, for example, tend to eat a great deal of fish and seaweed because their country is surrounded by the ocean. Many Japanese make their living as fishermen, and when people travel in Japan, they often find it easiest to go by boats as their country is made up of thousands of islands. If water makes up 70% of the Earth's surface, then the remainder, or about 1/3 of the Earth's surface, is covered by land. The largest areas of land on the Earth are 7 continents. These continents are North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica. Some of these continents are connected to one another. Europe and Asia are sometimes referred to jointly as Eurasia. The Ural Mountains are usually considered the dividing line between the two. North and South America are connected by Central America. Africa and Asia are connected by a narrow strip of land called the Isthmus of Suez. The surface of the Earth has many distinctive features. Some areas are flat, while others are steep. These different surface features are called landforms. There are 4 basic types of landforms. The ones you are probably most familiar with are hills and mountains. What distinguishes them is that hills simply are not as high as mountains. The other 2 basic types of landforms are plains and plateaus. Both terms describe areas that are flatter than hills or mountains. A plain is a large area of flat or nearly flat land. An area of flat land that rises higher than the land surrounding it is called a plateau, which means plate. In addition to these 4 basic types of landforms, there are many, many more. Some of the more familiar ones are islands, which are bodies of land completely surrounded by water, or peninsulas, which are pieces of land nearly surrounded by water. A type of landform you may be less familiar with is an isthmus, such as the Isthmus of Suez mentioned earlier, which is a narrow strip of land connecting 2 larger areas of land. Or a mesa, which is a high, flat-topped hill shaped like a table. In fact, mesa is the Spanish word for table. The Earth's landscape is constantly changing due to forces on its surface, as well as forces under its surface. Many of these changes happen so gradually they're difficult to see, except over a long period of time, such as the carving out of a valley by a river. Other changes are sudden and dramatic, such as an earthquake. Over millions of years, even the shapes of the continents have changed. Geographers believe that 200 million years ago, some of the continents may have been joined together. If you look at a map, you can see how some continents look as if they would fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. But very slowly, over millions of years, the continents moved apart until they ended up where they are today. Their movement has not stopped, however. Geographers predict that millions of years from now, the world could look very different than it does today. This movement of the continents is called continental drift. In order to understand continental drift, it is helpful to know what lies underneath the Earth's surface. Immediately under the land and water you see is a layer of rock called the Earth's crust. In some places, the crust is as thick as 20 miles. That may sound like a lot, but when you consider that the distance between the North and South poles is 8,000 miles, you realize that the crust is really quite a thin layer. Below the crust are layers of rock and metal that are so hot some of it is melted or molten. Crust floats on top of these layers, and because it is floating, it can move. The Earth's crust does not move all in one piece, however, but in large segments called plates. Geographers think that Africa and South America are two plates that very slowly move apart to form the two separate continents we know today. Many of the Earth's major geographic features are found along the edges of plates. As plates move and push against each other, their edges crumple up, eventually may form mountains or ocean ridges. The study of the forces within the Earth that cause these plate movements is called plate tectonics. In some cases, the movement of the Earth's crust produces sudden changes. As plates' edges push together or move apart, the ground above is sometimes unable to stretch anymore, and it may break and suddenly move. This is what happens in the case of earthquakes. Another effect of the movement of the Earth's crust are volcanoes. Sometimes the hot molten rock and metal underneath the crust is pushed up through cracks in the ground. The molten rock that flows out of the ground is called lava. Lava can build up over time to form volcanic mountains. Changes to the Earth's surface may also be caused by conditions on the Earth, not just inside the Earth. These kinds of changes, too, can happen suddenly or over millions of years. Water can have a dramatic effect on the surface of the land. Oceans gradually wear away the seashores. Heavy rains may cause rivers to flood. Flowing rivers over time can cut deep valleys through the land. In very cold areas, there are large moving sheets of ice called glaciers. As these glaciers move, they scrape away the ground beneath them, digging valleys. Thousands of years ago, glaciers covered much of Europe and North America. Many of these regions' mountains and valleys were formed by the movement of these glaciers. Wind, too, can cause changes to the surface of the land. As the wind blows, it carries away soil, eventually wearing down the land in a process called erosion. The wind also causes changes to the land through weathering. Small particles carried by the wind can act as an abrasive, gradually smoothing away the rough edges of rocks. Just as the availability of water can affect where people choose to live, landforms are also a major factor in determining population distribution. Extremely mountainous areas are generally thinly settled because it is difficult to build anything on the side of a mountain, and because the soil is usually too poor for farming. Most large population centers are located in flatter areas, since it is much easier to build cities and grow crops on level ground. Landforms also have an impact on what kind of work people do, as well as what kind of recreational activities they enjoy. Many people living in coastal or lowland plain regions, which are flatlands found near oceans or rivers, earn their living as farmers. These areas have the advantages of level land, making it easier to operate farm machinery and ample water supplies for crops. People who live in mountainous areas may spend their leisure time downhill skiing or mountain climbing. In flat areas, cross-country cross-country skiing and cycling would be more likely pastimes. Those people lucky enough to live on an island might enjoy sailing or windsurfing on the water that completely surrounds them. Water and land. These two things alone cover all the surface of the earth. Water may be salty, as in oceans, or fresh, as in rivers. The land may be steep like a mountain, or flat like a plain. But in all their various forms, land and water help determine not only where people live on the earth, but how they live as well. What do we call two sets of lines that geographers have created to help locate places on a map or globe? What are the two lines that divide the Earth into the northern and southern hemispheres and the eastern and western hemispheres? What percentage of the Earth's surface is covered by water? Can you name all 4 oceans? What percentage of the water found on Earth is fresh water? What are the 3 stages of the water cycle? Can you name all 7 continents? What are the 4 basic types of landforms found on the Earth? What name have geographers given to the movement of the continents over millions of years? Where would you be more likely to find a large population center? On top of a high mountain or on a coastal plain? When you think about geography, perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is land. You might think of the continents, or of the many different landforms found on the earth. Water, too, might come to mind, such as oceans and rivers and lakes. You might also think of the people living on the earth, and how their lives are affected by the land and water around them. Certainly, the study of geography would have to include land and water, for these two things cover all of the surface of the earth. But in addition to land and water, there is another feature geographers consider when studying the earth. This feature is climate. Climate is, simply put, the weather pattern of a region of the world over a long period of time. Many factors influence a region's climate. Perhaps the most important of these is the sun. The sun is the source of all light and warmth for every place on Earth. However, not all places receive the same amount of sunlight. This is because of the way in which the Earth moves around the sun. The Earth is constantly in motion. It is continually spinning on its axis, an imaginary line running through the center of the Earth, from the North Pole to the South Pole. This motion is called rotation. At the same time the Earth is rotating on its axis, it is also traveling around the sun. This second movement is called revolution. The amount of time it takes for the Earth to make one revolution around the sun is called a year. The Earth's axis is not straight up and down, tilted. Because of this, the Earth revolves around the sun. Different parts of the Earth are tilted towards the sun at various times of the year. For example, in July, the northern hemisphere is facing toward the sun. Half a year later, in January, it's tilted away from the sun. This movement of the Earth results in the different seasons of the year. When a hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, it receives more direct sunlight. The more sunlight a place gets, the warmer it becomes. Of course, if one side of the Earth is facing toward the sun, the other side must be facing away from the sun. When a place gets less sunlight, the weather becomes colder. So, for example, when it is winter in the northern hemisphere, it is summer in the southern hemisphere. There are other factors besides the sun that determine climate. In some places, the weather stays warm year-round, while in other parts of the world, it is cold all the time. One reason for this is latitude. Latitude is the distance a place lies north or south of the equator, measured by imaginary lines called lines of latitude. There are 5 latitude lines geographers use in discussing climate. The first one is the equator. Places located near the equator receive large amounts of sunlight all year round and are warmer than other places on Earth. 23.5 degrees north of the equator is a line of latitude called the Tropic of Cancer. When the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the sun, sunlight falls directly along this line. When the southern hemisphere is facing the sun, sunlight falls upon another line, located 23.5 degrees south of the equator, called the Tropic of Capricorn. Areas of the world located between these two lines are called the low latitudes or the tropics. South of the Tropic of Capricorn, 66.5 degrees south latitude, is a line of latitude called the Antarctic Circle. Another line called the Arctic Circle is located north of the Tropic of Cancer at 66.5 degrees north latitude. The areas between the tropics and these two lines are called the middle latitudes. The sun never shines directly on these areas, so places located here are cooler than in the tropics. The middle latitudes are also known as the temperate regions. North of the Arctic Circle and south of the Antarctic Circle are the high latitudes, or polar regions. These areas receive the least amount of sunlight, so places here are very cold. In fact, for half the year, these areas get no sunlight at all. Another factor that determines a region's climate is elevation. Elevation is the height of an area above sea level. Generally, the higher an area's elevation, the colder its climate. Because of this factor, snow can be found year-round on top of high mountains, even when the weather is warm down below. Another important aspect of a region's climate is the amount of precipitation that falls. In some places, it rains or snows nearly every day. Other places may be completely dry for most of the year, with rain coming only in certain months, like during the monsoon season in India. Wind, too, can have an effect on an area's climate. Depending on from which direction winds blow, they can be either warm or cool. Winds blowing from the tropics carry with them warm air. Similarly, winds blowing from polar regions bring cold air. Water currents can act the same as wind currents by carrying warmth or coolness from one part of the world to another. One example of this is the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream refers to ocean currents that carry warm water from the Gulf of Mexico to places as far north as Norway. Due to the effect of these water currents, even though Norway is located near the Arctic Circle, its climate is warmer than that of most places in the polar regions. Geographers divide the world into 6 main climatic regions: tropical, subtropical, temperate, subpolar, polar, and highlands. Each of these climatic regions are defined by both temperature and precipitation. For instance, places with a subtropical climate would be described as having hot, dry summers and cool, rainy winters. Climate has a great impact on people's everyday lives. Among other things, it affects what they wear and what kind of houses they live in. People who live in hot climates, for instance, wear very light clothing. The people who live in polar climates, such as Inuits, wear fur or other warm clothing to protect themselves from the cold. Inuits also live in houses that are well insulated to protect against the Arctic air. But people who live in hot climates don't need to worry about insulation. Instead, they might build their houses so that cool breezes can get in. Climate not only affects how people live, but in large part determines where they live. People may choose to live in a particular place because it has a pleasant climate. Many older people in the United States, for example, choose to retire to Florida or Arizona because it is warm there year-round. Very few people live in places that are too cold, such as Antarctica, or too hot and dry, like the Sahara Desert. Another feature geographers consider when studying a place is natural resources. Natural resources are the materials found in nature that people utilize in their lives. Water, land, and air are Earth's 3 basic resources. Other natural resources come from these 3, such as plants that grow on land or fish that live in water. The top layer of the land, the soil, is essential for the growth of another natural resource, vegetation. Trees, flowers, grasses are all different forms of vegetation. There are 5 main types of natural vegetation regions found on the Earth: forest, savanna, grassland, tundra, and desert. A forest is a place where trees are the main form of vegetation. Trees require a lot of water, so forests are generally found in climatic regions with frequent precipitation. Savannas are grassy areas with some trees growing. Savannas are found in regions that receive less precipitation than forest areas. Grasslands may be covered with a variety of different types of grasses. Grassland regions receive less rainfall than savannas and have few, if any, trees. A tundra is a type of plain found in polar regions. Here, the ground underneath the soil remains frozen all year long. The surface, however, is warm enough to allow small plants such as grass and moss to grow. Trees cannot grow on tundra. Deserts are dry areas where very few plants grow. Only plants that can live for long periods without water, such as cacti, can survive here. If you looked at a map of the natural vegetation regions of the United States, you would see that nearly the entire eastern half of the country is covered by forests. But you know that in reality it is not. That is because people have adapted the natural vegetation of the area to fit their needs. In this case, they have cleared some of the forests to create farmland to grow crops. Food crops, such as grains, fruits, and vegetables, and industrial crops, such as cotton and rubber, are all examples of planted vegetation. Another way in which people change the natural vegetation of an area is by supplying water to a dry region in order to make the land suitable for farming. This process is called irrigation. Much of the western half of the United States depends on irrigation in order to grow crops. Vegetation is an example of a renewable resource. Crops can be grown, harvested, and replanted over and over again. When trees are cut down to make paper products, new trees can be planted in their place. People depend on the land as a resource, not only for what grows on the land, but also for what forms in the land. Natural resources found in the land are called minerals. Minerals are usually divided into two categories, metals and nonmetals. Metals generally are solid, shiny, and can be molded and shaped. Some metals are rare and therefore quite valuable, such as gold and silver. Others, like aluminum and iron ore, are more plentiful and are used in great quantities for manufacturing. Non-metals include a wide variety of minerals used for many different purposes. Some, such as nitrates and sulfurs, are used as fertilizers. Others, such as sand and clay, are common building materials. The human body requires small quantities of minerals as nutrients to help function properly. Fossil fuels are another form of non-metal minerals. Fossil fuels include coal, petroleum oil, and natural gas. They get their name because they are formed from the fossils of dead plants and animals. Fossil fuels have many important uses, such as heating buildings and running machinery, such as automobiles. Unlike vegetation, people cannot grow new minerals. They can only mine or take out of the ground what exists naturally. Minerals, then, are a non-renewable resource. Some minerals, however, can be reused. Aluminum cans, for example, can be melted down and used to make new aluminum products. This method of using things over again is called recycling. Recycling and conservation will help make Earth's mineral resources last longer. Air and water, Earth's two other basic natural resources, are just as valuable as land. In fact, life on Earth could not exist without air and water. When geographers and scientists talk about air, they usually refer to it as the Earth's atmosphere. The term atmosphere includes the entire layer of air surrounding the Earth. The Earth's atmosphere is made up of a number of different gases, including oxygen, which is essential to human and animal life, carbon dioxide, which plants need in order to grow. Water, too, is essential to human life. Humans cannot live without fresh water to drink. Most of the water found on the Earth is salt water, and therefore not suitable for drinking. But the oceans, with their abundance of fish and other seafood, are an important food source for many people. Water and air, like minerals, are non-renewable resources. No more can be created. For this reason, it is extremely important for us to take care of these valuable resources. For years, people have been using air and water with little concern for conservation. Rivers and lakes have become polluted, and many industries have been releasing harmful smoke and gas into the air. Fortunately, people have begun to realize the importance of conserving air, water, and other natural resources. Laws have been passed to regulate pollution, and people are making an effort to limit their use of non-renewable resources. We all must do our part to ensure that Earth's natural resources remain long after we are gone. Just as water, landforms, and climate influence people's lives, natural resources, too, affect how people live in different regions of the world. For example, The natural resources available in a particular region can determine the type of houses people live in. In forest regions, most houses are built of wood, while in desert regions where there are no trees, people build their houses with bricks made from clay. These are called adobe houses. Natural resources can also determine what people do for a living. In areas with coal and iron ore deposits, many people work as miners. These mineral resources also provide jobs for those who process the iron ore into steel at steel mills. The Earth is a vast place, containing many different bodies of water, landforms, and climates, and there are people living in nearly every region of the Earth. However, people are not scattered evenly across the Earth. Some areas are quite heavily populated, while others are more thinly settled. When geographers discuss the number of people living in an area, they use the term population density. Population density is affected by a number of geographic factors. Few people live in areas that are too dry, like the desert, or too cold, like Antarctica. They don't live in areas that are too hard to reach, such as extremely mountainous regions. And they don't live in areas where the soil is too sandy or too rocky for farming. Instead, most people live in areas where they can find the natural resources to meet their needs. And since resources are not distributed evenly across the Earth, neither are people. Historically, people have settled in areas with good soil, a fresh water supply, and ample sunlight. With these things, they were able to grow the food they needed in order to survive. Other natural resources, such as minerals and fossil fuels, attracted people too. Oil deposits discovered in the Middle East transformed a barren desert region into a land of modern cities and wealthy oil companies. Few places have every resource its people need. As a result, people have had to engage in trade with other parts of the world in order to obtain the resources they want. When people from different areas come into contact with one another, often more goods are exchanged. They also trade ideas and customs. This interaction among different regions of the world leads us to our final discussion. When studying geography, you often hear the word region. But what exactly do we mean by region? Geographers define a region as an area with several things in common, sets it apart from other areas of the world. Geographers divide the world in regions in order to study it more easily. Often, a region is defined by its landforms, such as the Rocky Mountain region of the United States, or by its climate, such as the tropics. But most often, a region is defined by its culture, meaning the people living in the region share common cultural practices, such as language, religion, and art, and have common ideas about government and economics. More and more these days, people from different regions of the world are coming into contact with one another. Advances in technology have made transportation and communication easier and faster. And more people from different regions of the world are beginning to depend on each other for goods and ideas. This has resulted in what geographers call global interdependence. As our world becomes more and more interdependent, the need to learn about other places grows increasingly important. As our world continues to interact, people from different regions will hopefully grow to have a better understanding of one another. And eventually, perhaps we'll see that the things we have in common are more important than our differences. The Earth is constantly in motion. What are these two different motions called? Can you name the 6 climatic regions of the world? What 2 main factors do geographers use to determine a region's climate? Where would you find the warmest climates? In the low, middle, or high latitudes? What are the 5 natural vegetation regions found on the Earth? Can you name 2 ways people might change the natural vegetation of an area to fit their needs? Which of these resources is a renewable resource? Minerals are divided into 2 different categories. Can you name them? What are some results of the unequal distribution of natural resources across the Earth? How do geographers define region?